I feel currently just so out of shape and particularly inflexible after a year, mostly at home with toddlers who, I don't know if other parents have this, but I feel like I spend most of my day sort of lightly hunched over, like coiled like a spring at all times, ready to catch a falling Isaac. And I feel so crunched up and soft from all of this that it's sort of funny to me to think about when I used to do yoga a lot, but I did. There was a time when I did. Everybody who has experienced more than one yoga instructor knows that a yoga class is really made or broken by the instructor. Their level of aggressiveness, their choice of weird music, and most importantly, their descriptive abilities. I'm not the kind of person who can just see a pose and imitate it, and I'm also not the kind of person who can hear, like, set your back foot forward and lean your chest into your knees and just create the pose myself. I need both. I need the total audiovisual experience. And even then, sometimes I have no idea. I remember I had this one yoga instructor who would say we needed to ground down through our sits bone. And I was like, first of all, that's not how grammar works. And is my sits bone like my butt? Short answer, yes. The ground down person was my second yoga instructor after the first one got too pregnant to teach anymore. And generally, I found the new one less effective, but there were several times where, while doing poses that both instructors employed, I found kind of a new awareness of the particulars of the pose and even of my own body because of the differences in the way they each described it. Simple phrases that the second instructor would use, like bring your shoulders away from your ears, just clicked with me in a way that they might not have had I not heard the first instructor try to explain it to me in a different way that by itself did not work. This is true outside of yoga classes. When I'm learning anything, I do much better hearing multiple explanations and sort of averaging them out, or I guess more accurately, pulling the phrases and ideas that make the most sense to me from each source and assembling my understanding in a little brain collage.
Alright, so the song that I am absolutely living for right now is the collaboration between Sharon Van Etten and Angel Olsen. It's called Like I Used To. In a just world, this song would be the monstrous, world-destroying song of the summer. And, it just might be, actually. We'll see what happens. For sure, it's going to be the kind of indie rock hit that we hear playing at our friends' parties for the next 10 years and at various chain stores for the next 10 years after that. It's a really good song. It made me cry in my car this morning, and it's like the third time that it's done that. I think for me, the song, and especially the video, will be sort of connected forever with late period pandemic catharsis. There's this moment in the music video where, for most of the video, it's kept Angel Olsen and Sharon Van Etten apart. They appear sometimes in split screen, but they appear to be in different locations or at the same location at different times. But toward the end of the video, the split screen shots start to rotate, and the cameras move to the side, and the image joins together to reveal that they're standing across from each other in this field. And, that's the moment when I first heard the song that I started crying. This moment of isolation becoming connection.
Last Christmas, I got involved in this book exchange over Instagram. Susanna Mihailov's a past guest on the show. She posted about it, and I responded to her post, and, it's sort of like a benign pyramid scheme. She was sharing a post that someone else had shared with her, and the people who responded to Susanna's post are tasked with sending a copy of their favorite book to Susanna's friend. People who responded to my post were given Susanna's address to send her their favorite book, and people who responded to the people who responded to me were given my address. I had no idea if it was going to work, but I went and I bought a copy of Chad Harbach's The Art of Fielding, and I sent that to Susanna's friend, and I felt like I'd done my part. Then, like magic, I actually got a couple of books. I think it was 4 total in the end. The number of books that you get ends up being a reflection of the strength of your friends' networks, which means however many that Susanna got was partially a reflection on me, so I kind of hope she got a lot, but I don't know for sure. The mystery is part of the fun. Anyway, I got some cool books. One of them is this novel called Song of Achilles, which I have now read. And at first, I was a little uneasy about it because it felt like, well, it concerns a same-sex romance in a semi-historical context, and there is a familiar and sort of cliched and maybe kind of harmful general arc of those kinds of stories, and I thought that's what I was getting. But it was not, and in the end, I really, really loved that book. Why am I bringing all this up right now? Well, one of the other books that I got is called The Sun, My Heart by Thich Nhat Hanh, a Vietnamese Buddhist monk. And this dude hooked me immediately. I'm just going to read the first paragraph. Meditators have always known that they must use their own eyes and the language of their own times to express their insight. Wisdom is a living stream, not an icon to be preserved in a museum. Only when a practitioner finds the spring of wisdom in his or her own life can it flow to future generations. All of us must keep the torch of wisdom glowing in order to light the path ahead. This really helped me out in navigating my own increasingly articulated sense of purpose because, what is a podcast if not the language of our times? Using our language and experiences to frame and share wisdom, that's the name of the fucking game, right? I've said before that sometimes on this show I feel like I'm talking to my sons, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to people who are in the position I was in maybe 10 years ago, and sometimes I feel like I'm talking to myself. But this is another way of generally framing it that I really like. I think it's very easy to question the usefulness of a podcast, and a lot of people certainly do. The title of this show was a joke about the usefulness of podcasts, but in order to keep doing something, you have to believe in its usefulness. And in some ways, that's what I'm doing in this series of episodes, just recharging my belief in talking, even as I continue to question it.
Alright, so I'm driving to work right now listening to NPR because I am a cliche suburban liberal dad and I love it. But here's what I just heard. I just heard them say that 9 out of 10 Americans in a recent poll responded that they're comfortable discussing race with their friends and family, but only 2/3 of respondents actually have those conversations. So, when we're thinking about the efficacy of conversations about race, I think that's something to keep in mind, right? Is that 30% of the conversations about race are hypothetical. I could talk to my friends and family about race. I would feel comfortable doing so. Am I going to? No, I am not. And I think we need to include that measurement when we assess whether or not all this talk about race and racial justice has moved the needle. And of course, when I recorded that last bit, it was sort of right before the big critical race theory controversy started taking over school board meetings across the country, and it has since occurred to me that those 9 out of 10 people willing to talk about race might not, all agree with me. Everybody has that one uncle who we know is very willing to talk to his family about race, and we really wish that he would not. Now, the critical race theory meeting screamers are not really talking, are they? Not actually having to talk about it is sort of key to maintaining the illusion and the anger. It's another version of political correctness or even cancel culture, like an ill-defined term that can be blamed for anything and everything. Lumber prices are out of control right now. That's Joe Biden and his critical race theory for you. Yeah, sure. Tell me more about that. Okay, yes, sure, there are people out there complaining about critical race theory who have specific grievances, which really amount to they don't want any admission of national and or Caucasian guilt admitted in schools. And that's not new, it just has a new name. For the most part, you're not going to get an articulate criticism of critical race theory, you're just going to get screamed at. And that's the trick to understanding this current little mini phenomenon to me. The aggressive behavior that these parents are showing at school board meetings and Panera Bread and wherever else they're probably currently screaming about it. All the shouting and the shoving and the disruption is necessary to keep it going. Their ideas are not going to win. They barely have articulated thoughts beyond stock phrases about liberals and indoctrination. So they have to be preemptively silenced in some fashion. They have to get kicked out of the meeting instead of being allowed to speak at the microphone, which, if they had just walked in and asked, of course they would be able to do. They intentionally act out in order to lend a false legitimacy to their claims. Of course I wasn't allowed to speak. The truth I'm speaking's too dangerous. No, man, you were shouting racial slurs at a meeting that uses Robert's Rules of Order. If you walk naked into a 7-Eleven and they kick you out, it's not a liberal conspiracy, but since you really did get kicked out, now you can believe that if you need to. And for whatever reason, they need to.
Can you give me a little voice check too for you?
Yeah, sure, of course. I can definitely do that. Check,
Oh, that's
check,
perfect.
Check. Is it good? Good.
Yeah, so you want to keep the microphone pretty
Keep
close.
it pretty close.
Yes.
Yeah.
The ability to rise from an ascribed status to an achieved one is called vertical mobility.
Yeah, the last year has actually been, it's been really, it's it has all of the difficulties that you would imagine, right?
Right.
And, for us here at Green Acre, it's been a particularly, since our main purpose is gathering humans together in the same place, that was a big shock. But some really incredible, amazing things have come out of the year because of the limitations.
Yeah.
When I looked at the numbers, we engaged a lot more people with Green Acre content this year than we had in any previous year.
Isn't that it's so funny how that definitely holds true for so many organizations that reach out to people, that they've been able to reach more people in a different way, and everyone has taken these technological leaps forward that they probably maybe they were going to take eventually.
Right.
But it's like they had to do it now.
Yeah.
And I mean, for my purposes, right, both professionally and just my own creative stuff, everyone becoming really technologically savvy has been great for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you
yeah.
don't have to explain anything to anyone
Right,
anymore.
it's true. That is true. Yeah, we've jumped in and yeah, folks who would not have made that leap in some cases because they just didn't want to, right? And it was too much hassle and there wasn't a need.
Yeah.
And there's an overwhelming need, so people got through that, and then the creativity that's flowed from it has been really, really interesting to see. It feels like, okay, well, we can't do this, so what are we going to do, and how does it? So I don't know. It's just been so that part has been really good. I don't know. I keep debating about what to call the awareness about racial justice, because it's really white people becoming aware of racial justice.
Yeah.
Not black folks becoming
Right.
aware of racial justice.
They already knew.
They kind of had a clue before. I mean, reckoning, I don't feel like is accurate to what's happening.
The Great White Awakening.
Yes, exactly. And it's just awakening. It's not even, in some cases, it's more than that. But mostly it's just
Talk, right? Welcome to the last podcast. I'm Zach Little. And although you can jump in wherever, this is more or less part 2 of a little summer series that we're doing about talk. For the last year and change, talking is really all we've been able to do. And I've been curious what, if anything, it helped. Because, as you know, we got some problems. We have a lot of issues with race and identity, and we also have this hovering, unaddressed trauma stemming from a still ongoing global pandemic. And of course, the two are not unrelated. A couple of weeks ago, I went back to Green Acre, which is a conference facility and Baha'i school in Elliott, Maine, focused particularly on racial unity. I went there in early 2020 to interview Najee Brown and Robert Sapiro in what was one of this podcast's very first forays into discussing race, a topic that we have revisited many times since. A couple months later, I helped organize a webinar about diversity, equity, and inclusion, which included Naji as a guest speaker. And a couple weeks after that, I edited the video from another DE&I webinar with Robert on the panel. Last time on the show, when I talked to Lori Cotrino about those and many other DE&I trainings, I found myself thinking of Robert, wanting his perspective on all of this too. As luck would have it, the night before we met up, he'd spoken at another event, this one curated by, naturally, Naji Brown, which was about how to shift from talk to action. Which worked out great, because that's what I wanted to talk about too.
As a whole, we've been trying to figure out, like, you know, as an organization, how do we look at everything we're doing in that light? You know, which many organizations are doing, obviously, right? But I think for us, it was a weird, like, oh, yeah, we're committed to this. But then it's like, oh, well, how committed are we? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, sure.
you know, who are we hiring at all levels and all
For
that
you
stuff?
guys, you know, it's probably like a second order level of self-assessment and reckoning. You know, like there are a lot of organizations that are just now for the first time having like the diversity conversation,
Yeah.
particularly around New Hampshire, because New Hampshire had the convenient excuse of, well, what do you want us to do? There's not a lot of diversity here
Right.
for a long time, right? And and a lot of people have said, I've heard people say over and over again, like, there's no excuse now. You know?
Right.
And
yeah.
so, like, they've, and in part, that's because of the way that the pandemic and virtual working and everything else has kind of leveled a lot of boundaries. But it's also because the conversation has gotten so urgent and serious that people have actually investigated this idea of, like, well, wait, are there people? Are there people of color that maybe we could hire? Have we actually looked?
Right.
Um,
yeah.
So yeah, but it's nice, it's interesting and cool to know that Green Acre is also having that same kind of assessment and conversation, because I think you have a lot of evidence in your past work to say, like, well, we have been doing things, at least, you know. So that's actually the main thing I wanted to talk to you about
Yeah.
were these conversations, because I have helped organize diversity, equity, and inclusion panels over Zoom.
Yep.
I have attended several. I went to one in person at the music hall, which was really bizarre to be at. Like,
Yeah.
This was like last month. It was for various arts organizations around the area.
Oh,
so
okay.
I went as part of the New Hampshire Theater Project,
Yes. Yeah.
and it was pretty wild to be in a room, sitting in chairs. You know, you still like barely interacted with anybody. You know, it was still
Right.
like a fairly isolating experience. But still, it was another diversity, equity, and inclusion training.
Yes.
And so I know that I've been to a lot of these. I know there are
Yep.
tons of them. I know that you've been on panel discussions for several of them.
Yeah.
And I was wondering what you thought about how that was going.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
if you thought, like, if there was anything you could point to that you think those have accomplished.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and I think they have. I think what they've accomplished is sort of two levels of things, which I think are useful, but not sufficient.
Right. Okay.
Right.
Perfect.
so I think the two levels that they've done is that they've brought in that kind of group of white folks who might agree in theory or might be inclined to sort of investigate that, but haven't, right? So who really haven't committed to sort of thinking about racial justice in any meaningful way, or even their own inner work in a meaningful way, but would be inclined, you know, given the year and the amount of how the information was brought into our information system,
Yeah.
right? You know, this is kind of a sidelight because I keep, you know, it's like, oh no, well, I was like, you know, well, there was suddenly evidence of police brutality and murder, right? You know, of black folks. It was like, no, there's actually been plenty of evidence of that before. It's like, well, there was videotapes. Well, there's been videotapes, right? So it was kind of an interesting. So for me, it was realizing that, like, oh, actually, for most white folks, it was the protests that meant that something had changed. It wasn't the reality of black
Yeah.
people being murdered by police, right? It was the reality of, like, oh, there's this consistent protest. So anyway, so I think there are folks who would gain would be inclined in that direction. It gave them a place to actually start talking, start moving in some ways, right? And it also, you know, gave them access to the resources, all the bestsellers and all that stuff that people are jumping into who might be inclined to do that. So I think that was one level. The second level was the folks who were already a little bit more committed, and they were wanting to kind of accelerate on their path and sort of realize, there's a whole bunch of other people who want to do this too. So I think those are two things that those conversations, two levels of things. I think the challenge and the danger has been that for well-meaning white folks, they might think going was they had completed their job.
Right.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I think that's true. I think the other thing that maybe they do. So I was thinking about that, right? Like, are these conversations reaching anyone who disagrees?
Yep.
And I don't know. I know that when I was organizing one that Naji participated in, we were warned about someone who registered, who was well known to the organization as being someone who might be sort of disruptive.
Yep.
And I think everybody was kind of like, okay, like I was the one who was moderating the chat room.
Yeah.
And I was ready. You know what I mean? I was so excited. But this person never appeared. They registered but did not attend the training. And I thought that's probably the way it goes a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I think that maybe the DE&I training does, this is what I hope it does.
Yeah.
I hope it helps people update some of their terminology a little bit.
That's true. Very true.
Yeah, because I would say that if we have anything we have well-meaning, like, 90s progressives on the seacoast, right?
Yes, absolutely.
The people who say, like, I don't care if you're black, brown, purple, or orange.
Right, yeah.
Or, like, I'm colorblind, that kind of phrase. And that kind of thinking was the progressive way of thinking.
It was, yeah.
And so to hear people of color articulate instead the way they're thinking about it now, I think is, at least I hope it's helpful.
Yeah.
Like, something that happened on this podcast with you and Naji was Naji described Black Lives Matter. And he was talking about Black Lives Matter always being not an issue of black versus white, but a police issue. And my own mother listened to that and said, I had never thought about it that way.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought, this is so when we were organizing that DE&I conversation, a white person was wondering out loud whether or not we should say Black Lives Matter in the conversation. And I said immediately, absolutely have to. You cannot. It would be crazy to put a ban on saying Black Lives Matter in a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I said, in fact, you should really encourage it to come up, because when you do, Naji will say what he told me, and there's a lot of people that are going to hear that.
Yeah.
And it's going to help them, I hope, in a way.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking back on that panel, and I don't know if it ever did come up or not. But
oh, interesting. That's funny. Yeah, no, that's a really good. I think the terminology question is really important, and to see where the thinking is and seeing how it's evolved is really, really important. And I feel like that has been something that these conversations have been useful for. I was thinking about sort of a couple of levels of, I've been wondering. I tend towards most of my action to then be engaging in more conversation as my action, and then I'm sort of like, ooh, is that enough? You know what I mean? Like, I have questions about that, and is that the most effective thing to do? I've been thinking about it on sort of two different levels. One is that, when we do anything in the world, we often do a lot of talking before we take the action, right? And I was thinking of a terribly consumerist kind of example, but if you purchase a car, you do a lot of talking, you do a lot of research, you do a lot of trying to figure out like what not everybody does, but you know what I'm saying. Like, as a general rule,
I do more thinking about doing research than I don't actually do it.
Right, exactly.
And then I make an impulse purchase.
Right, of course, sure. Yeah, cars maybe back. No, but what I'm saying is that there is sort of an ongoing conversation that happens. You know what I mean? And all of us. I don't know why I'm on this car example, but I'll just continue with it. Is that, we all decide kind of where we are in the world of cars, what kind of cars, what's important to us, like, whether it's gas mileage or whether it's looks or whether it's, I want extreme comfort, whatever the things that people value.
Yeah.
But they make all those decisions in conversation or in interaction, right? So partly I think these kinds of conversations are really important because for people to understand what's going on, there's a lot that people need to figure out, especially here in the Seacoast, white folks in the Seacoast, right? Because the conversations, the understandings there are certain notions that are very limiting about what the reality is, at least from my view, which is like you started at the beginning, which is, we're in the Seacoast, it's mostly white folks, so we don't really have a problem, or whatever the thinking that follows from that.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of stuff that people need to engage with before they can usefully start taking action that would be meaningful for change. So I feel like there is that both conversational and learning component, and I think so I feel like those things are really, really important. Again, if people come away and think, "Oh, I'm done," right? That's a problem. And then also, if we are just talking to the same group of folks over and over again, which is definitely a challenge, right? Because and especially now that there's the entirely predictable backlash from white folks about even talking about, like, now once you got a certain number of white folks talking about these things, then you got the other white folks who are going to make sure that we can't talk about that at all.
Yeah, there was that employer recently that was in the news. I can't remember the name. It was like a tech company. It's not WeWork, but it's another one of those controversial kind of like weird tech startups.
Yeah.
And they basically like banned talking about race and other issues. And of course, there was a big backlash, and a bunch of their like top level designers resigned and all this other. I'm not sure exactly what happened next yet. I think it's kind of still ongoing. But I remember thinking when I read that would not seem like an unreasonable policy a couple of years ago.
Right.
Can't talk about politics at work.
Yeah, right.
And now it seems outrageous.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's like, that's I don't know if that counts for anything, right? But that is some form of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I think there's, I think the it's interesting too to think about like what you were mentioning earlier, which is, folks with very different views and opinions coming into these conversations, and how do we do that? Because I feel like, it is, there is, like I said, I think there's something useful about bringing folks who already are inclined in that direction to jump in and refine and understand the language better now where we are and the concepts and where we're going. So I think all of that is useful. But then, how do we talk to other folks? How do we engage in these conversations with folks who are seeing things very differently or unwilling or even oppositional? I think for me is the next sort of area of exploration. And I've had a chance to engage with folks who really do have very different views about this, and try and figure out how do I do that? Like, how do I actually have a meaningful conversation? How does it not just fall into, some form of me saying they're wrong and them saying I'm wrong, right? Which is entertaining but not helpful.
Yeah, right. That's the thing. Yeah, like, so on the spectrum of conversation, right, you have like the conversation that just becomes oppositional, right? And well, actually, I guess the very end is just no conversation at all. Worst version is no conversation at all, which is what some people are going for with like all the various new copies of the 1776 project thing that's happening. I think it's dead, but there was a bill in New Hampshire.
It's actually not. Is
it back again?
Well, so what they did was it passed the House of Representatives, and then in the Senate, it got put into the budget bill. Mm-hmm. So the language is still there under the large budget bill.
Uh-huh.
So it's still very much alive. So there's still a strong possibility that it could get signed as part of this larger budget thing and have that language in there.
You know who should speak? You know who we should locate to talk about this a little bit is. So I have a friend who is in the U.S. Army. He joined the Army at 33. That was
wow.
It's as old as you can possibly be.
Yeah.
He joined in August of last year, which I thought was the most insane decision that anyone has ever taken.
Yeah.
But he joined the army, and he's in this unit. And originally, there were these Trump-era policies in place of you cannot discuss these issues. There's no racial sensitivity training, nothing like that. Joe Biden gets elected, reverses that. So same unit that he's been with all this time now has these racial sensitivity trainings.
Oh, interesting.
And this friend of mine really loves drama. He was delighted because he said all these people didn't know they disagreed with each other.
Oh, yeah.
And they've been together all this time. And now they sit down and have a conversation.
Wow.
And I think, my sense is that that's kind of damaging, right? And that having those conversations early and often is probably the best way to have a cohesive unit.
Right.
So I guess I was just imagining, why we got to get somebody in uniform to testify as to the efficacy of having these conversations.
Yeah.
So since this conversation took place, New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu has in fact signed a very controversial budget bill into law. The bill restricts abortion access and contains an only lightly amended version of that ban on teaching divisive concepts, which originates from a Trump administration initiative that Robert's going to elaborate on a little more in a moment. The New Hampshire version stipulates that no child can be taught that they are inferior, racist, sexist, or oppressive by virtue of their race, gender, or other characteristics. In response to the signing of this budget bill, 10 of the 18 members of the Governor's Diversity Council resigned in protest. Good for them.
No, it's very, very interesting, and I think I got so curious because these talking points around critical race theory, and without even talking about what actually critical race theory is, but just
they have no idea.
They have no idea. So it's just an amalgam of bad things, right? And I think it's also beautiful because that phrase can get people who are worried about it really upset on it's critical, it's race, it's theory, all three of those words are bad.
There are class lines within each general group, and these vary geographically and in relation to nationality, religion, and race.
Because I knew that there was the executive order in the previous administration, and that was almost identical to the bill in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And then I heard that there were bills, so there's 8 or 9 bills out in different state legislatures. Idaho passed it. Mm-hmm. But essentially the same language. It turns out there's a fellow from the Manhattan Institute, Christopher Rufo, I think is his name, who came up with this, basically the talking points for that. He got on Fox News. The previous president saw it, turned it into an executive order. In the meantime, these states' Republicans reached out to him and said, oh, can you do that for us? And so that's why there are all these bills out there. So that is an interesting kind of way that, seeing how these ideas are disseminated. But for me, seeing at the local level is the part that is really fascinating. So I'm in a conversation about race with parents at my son's school, and all of a sudden, these same talking points are coming out from one of the participants, right? So it's it was almost exactly the same things. And I was like, wow, this is so interesting, how this is happening, right? And then for me, it's sort of a challenge of okay, here's, a fellow parent. What do I do? How do I respond? How do I engage with conversation with that person, right?
Yeah.
Is the big question.
That's tough. Yeah. It's funny. I remember, I think it's Hannah Arendt has a quote it's about anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
But about it being this form of intellectualism for unintellectual people, which is not the most charitable characterization,
right, sure.
But I think about it all the time when I hear about things like that, people coming at you with these exact talking points from, it's they have this in their head, this unarticulated anger, right? And then someone says something that sounds smart enough, and that's exactly the thing about a phrase like critical race theory too, is that that phrase is built for the people who are against it, because
right.
it's this thing that makes you seem smart, right?
Yes.
And as soon as you have this pattern of organizing the world in a way that aligns with what you think already, you're locked in, man. It's scary.
Yeah.
Because it's this thing where it's the feeling is I'm smart and everyone else is not.
Right.
And No one else sees what I see the truth. I see the reality.
Yeah.
You all are clouded by your propaganda, but me, and this one thing I heard a guy say on the news 6 years ago, one time, that burned itself into my brain. I'm the one who knows everything.
Yeah.
And it's scary because it is the opposite of being wise, packaged in the form of wisdom.
Right.
And it's like, I don't know what you do about that.
No, it's real, and I think for me, it actually requires some self-reflection as well, right? And I have to sort of apply the same thing to myself when I'm thinking about the same, when I'm seeing that in other people.
Yeah.
And kind of go, okay, where am I getting my ideas? How am I hearing? What am I listening to? And sort of sorting that out. And how do I avoid that smugness and that sense of superiority? Right?
Yes.
What was it, after all, that made these people do the things they did? Was it a lack of understanding?
It is scary to see how that takes hold, for people, and how, like you're saying, oh, I heard this thing, it already agrees with my worldview, but I sound a little bit smarter, and so now I'm going to say it, and and I think we're all struggling to some degree with like, oh, I see reality and the other person doesn't, and I think one of the things I've been trying to be disciplined about and kind of going on is like, I see a part of reality. I probably have some insights that somebody else might not have, but they probably have some insights that I don't have. And even if we come to different conclusions about important things, I still need to be listening carefully enough to figure out. I had this. This was more about masking and this kind of thing. So I met a neighbor who had recently moved here, and we were out. It was somewhere. It was warm, but I think it was still the fall, and she was her husband was in Virginia, and sort of stuck down there because he couldn't leave because of whatever was happening in Virginia at the time, and she was complaining a little bit. She started complaining about, oh my God, the governor's gone too far or something like that, and I was like, oh wait, okay, we're going in that direction, right? Because for me that was like, no, that sounds like a reasonable step to take given that we have a pandemic, and so. But then I had stuck with her a little bit and listened and realized like, oh my God, she's just missing her husband, right? You know what I mean? And so then it's like, oh my God, it's the governor's fault. Like, so there was a quick, and then she was talking about masking, and she has her sister-in-law has a disability and is in a home and was actually shut in a room and had to wear a mask and was really frightened. So that was the information she was getting about masking, right? So she had this very personal, emotional attachment to her sister-in-law, to her husband, where like, and so at a human level, I could relate to that and not jump to the to the politics conclusion, right? That like, oh my God, they're imposing this thing, because it was, for her, it was a very real concern, and again, I didn't jump to that conclusion that the governor was making the wrong decision.
Right.
Right. But for her, I could at least understand where that was coming from.
Was their attitude picked up from their prejudiced parents? Or was it simply a matter of going along with the attitude of the group?
I've definitely had my moments of judgment about people and their sort of denial of the way to... The best way to be safe, or the best way to try to be safe around other people. I feel like sometimes people don't get that it's like, yes, they did say you don't need to wear masks, and they did say you do need to wear masks, and it's because it's actually a good thing, right? It's a sign that we're continuing to investigate this stuff, and it's the same thing with like distrust of vaccines.
Yeah.
It's like you do kind of expect there to be some bumps in the road. It's good that we know, right?
Right.
If this thing that happened with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, where they kind of took it off and then put it back, that's good.
Right.
That means that they're trying to make it safe.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's how it's not what you think it is.
Right.
Because if they were just trying to kill everybody with the vaccine, they would just kill everybody with the vaccine. But I do, in my moments of more charitable thinking about it, I think about what an insane thing this year has been.
Yeah.
And how this has happened. And I think about how scary it was when it first kicked in. And then kind of the way I could feel myself adjusting to it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of startling, but you're like, I think I'm grateful that I have the emotional foundation and the support system in my life and everything, that I can be like, okay, I can handle this.
Yeah.
But there are people for whom that didn't happen, right?
Right,
People who
yeah.
didn't adjust, or people who never reckoned with the reality of what was happening.
Yeah.
And that, think about how that gets worse and worse and like metastasizes in you.
Yeah.
And so I really, when people go crazy at a grocery store, knock over a bunch of bananas because they were asked to wear a mask, I'm like, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard. Like,
Yeah.
in some ways, we should have way more like public anger and freakouts, right? Because like, what a horrible thing that happened to all of us.
Yeah.
This trip to the hospital could be the first step for these students at East High toward tearing down the false barriers which their own bias and prejudice have built. But will it work? Each of these people must find the answer only through re-examination of his own feelings and attitudes. For this is the problem of the individual more than of the group.
One thing I've been thinking about a lot is, you know, what's the social kind of reality or environment that people are in, you know, and these days because, you know, partly because of the additional isolation, but also, you know, the way our media environment is right now. I can listen to things, like literally listen to things I entirely agree with if I want to,
Yeah.
right? You know, and have that be the main source of information. But I have a relative who lives out in Idaho, and so realizing like her social reality is just so different. Like, so all the little things that I count on to sort of feel confident about something like masking, right? Where, you know, almost everybody in my social circle agrees that it's a good idea, right? So I don't have, and she's in an environment where nobody in her social circle thinks it's a good idea,
Yeah.
right? So all of a sudden, all the clues that we pick up about what's okay or what's not okay, right? She's not getting any of those, right? So she feels, you know, she came and visited because, anyway, so it's a long story, but you know, she was like really reluctant and frustrated about wearing masks, right? And so it was like, whew, how do I deal with this, right? You know, because there's like the immediate feeling of safety, right, that I had concerns about, you know, and having been in an environment like where all my social cues are saying, no, this is a good idea. It's weird, it's hard, you know, we might not want to do it, but it's for the better for everyone. And her experience was just the opposite.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine.
It is, and it's really hard to kind of think like outside. And so, you know, it was fascinating to try and, you know, understand and like there was a bunch of negotiation, like we were in some shared spaces, and, you know, figuring that out was really hard. But then just to really appreciate that, like, oh, really, she's not getting any clues, and what she's, and even worse, I mean, from my perspective, is that the folks who are saying it's a good idea are already demonized to a certain extent. Right. And so, and I think there's that human power, like that human reaction of like when somebody from the other side, however we perceive that, says something, it's automatically wrong, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like,
What is prejudice? And why does it exist? What do you think?
So, like, that's something. So, I think we kind of zeroed in on two things, which is like a general sense of other people and other people's like interiority, and the reality of that interiority is really important, really hard to come by. You know, it's something that I think it's one of those things too that sometimes you think you have it and you don't yet. And so and then the other part of it is just the understanding that we talked about, like the updating your vocabulary, right? But the other part of it is just that it's always going to change.
yes.
And understanding that it's always going to change because we're still thinking about it. The same way that mask and vaccine science is always going to change because we're still thinking about it.
Right.
That's a hard thing for people to realize or accept. Maybe
Accept.
they realize it, but they don't accept it.
Yeah.
And that's work that we all have to do. And that's like, I think having conversations about race and about the pandemic and all that stuff really helps.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely, I don't know, that part at least seems clear to me.
Because the criteria for class boundaries vary from place to place. And so it will be for all these babies. All citizens, all equal before the law, but not the same by standards of class.
You recently participated in this panel that was about taking talk and shifting it into action.
Yes.
And I think it's something that's on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
I think I was interested in, I've become interested in the efficacy of talking because for the last year, it's all we've really been able to do.
Yeah.
There's a real limit on action right now, but not for much longer, hopefully. So I think people are thinking about it. And so how did that go? How did the conversation about turning talk into action go?
Yeah, it was for me, it was a really helpful ongoing conversation. So the course that I've been helping to facilitate and participating in for a good number of years, White People Challenging Racism, moving from talk to action. So the goal of the course is essentially for people to come out with an action plan. So that's kind of, so unlike other kinds of training or other things where it's awareness building, this is awareness building, some practice of some tools that you can use, and then an action plan to actually leave with an accountability partner, and looking through and seeing, looking at some of the potential pitfalls, etc. So that's kind of the way it's designed. And it's sort of immediately trying to get the participants to go from, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. Oh, this is, all those kinds of important questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
For white people to realize about racism. But then to actually start to focus in, okay, what's my sphere of influence? Here I am. What institutions can I affect? Maybe it's my workplace. Maybe it's my religious organization. Maybe it's my family. You can think of that as an institution. Maybe I'm a doctor, and I can think about wherever the influence is. So to have people, but go through and really start to think about, where could I, think about how racism is affecting the environment I'm in. And what could I do to change that, given where I'm at? So that's kind of where the emphasis has been with that program, and I think it is it feels more effective than just awareness, right? It seems to work better with folks who have already developed some awareness, gotten through those initial stages so that they can get into an action mode. And I've been thinking a lot about, there's a couple of different models out there that I've been exploring and trying to understand myself of what are the phases for a white person to be, kind of, there's this initial awareness phase, then there's how do you move from action? How do you move to somebody who actually is promoting racial justice? But then also acknowledging what are those phases like for people and what do they mean, right? Because some of the patterns feel fairly clear to me. There's the resistance. There's the I agree, but still the resistance that they aren't acknowledging, right?
Yeah.
There's the oh my gosh, I'm feeling pretty aware about all this, but I don't know what the heck to do. One of the things I realized that, going to tea talks with Black Heritage Trail, and there was always a white person who gets up and says, what are we going to do? And then I kind of looked around the room, and I was sort of like, wait, there's 100 people here, even just in terms of financial resources. This is a group of people that could transform a lot, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? If they so and white folks, I think, and especially, oftentimes it's white women who are most willing to engage in these conversations, and so you have the intersectionality of race and sexism, racism and sexism, right? So they may not feel the power that they have, despite how much power they have as white women. I think there is that sense of oh my gosh, what can we do? So in that conversation that we had, we described a little bit and some of the action plans people have and those kinds of things. And so I think all of that is good. But one of the things that I took away from having a chance to reflect on that, and where I've seen action be most effective, is when people really have kind of a cohort of people to work with, or minimum a sort of an accountability partner that they're continuing to work with, but ideally a group of people. Because like you're saying, it's a constantly evolving, constantly learning process. And if you're attempting to take action, the chances of you getting the action right at the beginning are pretty darn small, right? You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of learning and refinement to think about. You know, it's so it's interesting because you have some initial conclusions that organizations now, especially, are thinking like, oh my gosh, we need more people of color in our organization, which is great. But if you don't have the conditions for those people of color to actually thrive, right, then it's actually not that helpful for those folks, right? And it's only a feel-good thing for the white people, right? Like, oh my gosh, look, we have a person of color.
Yeah. That's funny. It's interesting because the road to action is paved with more and more conversation, right?
Yeah.
And so you have to... The idea of an accountability partner makes a lot of sense to me because you have to avoid getting like cul-de-saced,
Yeah.
So like, let's say you take a diversity training and you're like, I'm going to push my employer to form a DE&I council. And you do. And then what happens?
Right.
They meet once a month and they talk. The end,
Right.
And it's like,
yeah.
so how do you, there's so many actions that can terminate in just more conversation.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that makes progress so hard because that is the way it happens, but it's also the way it doesn't happen.
Right. Yeah. No, that's such a really good point, actually. For me, the thing that I also have realized that I feel like is the most important, I was talking with one of my co-facilitators and trying to figure out, it's like, sort of on the awareness realm, there's so much information now available, much more than when I started out in 2001. What was immediately available, there was plenty of research out there, but it was hard to get. Right now, you have no shortage of information. But realizing it's not an information issue, right? It's more than that. It's like, what are the concepts that people have, and what is their commitment to long-term action? Like, that to me, the commitment part is the bigger deal, right? Actually having resolve to say, I'm going to commit to solving this, because that can change whatever actions we do this month, this quarter, this year. They can contribute, but they're not going to be sufficient. There's just no way, right? And for me, the realization of like, this is a multi-generational task to uproot racism in our country, right? We simply don't have, it's just going to take, it won't happen in my lifetime. Progress can happen in my lifetime. That's not the question, but it's not. So I feel like, to me, developing that sense of resolve and commitment to learning about what's going to work, so that when you say, hey, here's my workplace, we need a DEI council, great, we did that. Now they're meeting every month. Okay, now what? Right? How do we then say, great, so what are we going to do about the hiring? When's it going to happen? How are we going to develop the pipeline? How do we get the people here? Okay, great, now the people are here. How are we going to deal with the issues that come up around that? How are we going to make the folks of color be able to thrive in this environment? What do we need to change? You know what I mean? So then year 3, year 5, year 10, the organization has actually made progress versus, a lot of what's happened this year, which is, we're a white organization. We're not bad. I swear, we have a DEI council. Thank you. Like,
Yeah. That's it. That's the third piece of it, right? We talked about these things you need to overcome in your own head, this understanding of other people, and this is the last piece of it, is that, so you need to accept that other people have an interiority and they have their beliefs, even if you believe they're wrong, might be coming from somewhere that you are not anticipating. You have to recognize and understand the validity of other people. You have to understand that our thinking changes all the time. And so just because you understood that it was good to say, I'm colorblind in 1997, doesn't mean that it's good now. And then the last, probably the hardest and highest hurdle to overcome, is the understanding that this is a multi-generational, ongoing, never-ending thing. You don't get to a point where you say, we won.
right.
So you just have to commit to doing it forever, and you have to assess your commitment to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. That's the last one. That's the last hurdle.
That is I think by far the most important piece. So if folks can develop that sense of resolve for the long term, and keep that learning mode that you know what I mean, where it's constantly, we don't, the good solutions that are going to be 2041 are going to look different than the good solutions in 2021, right?
Yeah.
And so we have to be thinking about what is it that we're really striving for, and have that commitment, because, and I think one of the things, that I see is that when white folks come across these problems, they try and solve them like they do other short-term solvable problems, right? It's like, I'm just using kind of business model. Well, we've got to increase the profit margin or whatever, right? So we can take these actions, and within 3 quarters, we can have done something measurable. I think when we're talking about racial justice, we have such a long-term entrenched problem that we can't think that way, and we can't also. The other thing too is that the sort of notion that a lot of white folks is like, well, let me do something. If I think it's about me, I guess ultimately on multiple levels, but an organization can have that same effect of thinking, well, we're a good organization. One of the things I realize that I keeps coming up for me in these conversations about race is that, for people of color, for BIPOC folks, this is life and death questions. For white folks, it's, am I okay?
Yeah.
Right? Am I a good person? Am I, and so and I feel like that whole notion then sometimes becomes about an organization. We're a good organization. We put out our statement. We have our DEI council. We're good. We're good now, right? And then they're looking for BIPOC folks to say, yeah, you're okay, right? That's not the question, right? Whether I'm okay or not okay,
Yeah.
or whether I'm a good person or not a good. I can be a great person and racism won't change. I can be a terrible person and racism won't change, right? You know what I mean? Like, so the question is, how do I contribute to a larger process? And it's not about me or not about my organization.
So that's that. Thank you, Robert Sapiro, for sitting and having this conversation with me. I'm kind of shocked at how little I broke in with these voiceover bits, which I usually do to hide my own rambling and inarticulate questions. I think that Robert just expresses his ideas so clearly and simply that it made me a better interviewer just by osmosis. I know that sometimes the topics on this show, which started out as a very personal project, I know they can be a little specific and seemingly impersonal, like the stuff about an organization's approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion today. But what I hope is that you can see the personal aspect in that and think a little bit about your role wherever you work or have worked or will work in the future. Something I kind of want to emphasize and underline is that at a lot of workplaces, there are opportunities right there for you to make a meaningful difference for other people. And I hope that you're feeling the same way I am, which is that talking can in fact make a meaningful difference, or at least get you most of the way there. Next time on the show, we're still going to be talking about talking, but centered on a much lighter topic, death. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.
There is a whole new generation coming, soon to be young adults. A bigger than ever market of people who have a history of their own, who remember all the way back to Eisenhower, who probably never saw their mother use a ringer, think automobiles or household appliances, and have reserved seats on the next rocket to leave the Earth.